So, we are all part of a story. And as with all stories, we find ourselves in a setting. Sometimes the plot thickens and the setting shifts, but whatever happens, we will always find ourselves somewhere. In that somewhere, there will be a particular climate, a particular botany, a particular topography. We are all connected with these places we were born into, where we took our first steps, the places we learned, grew, and became the version of ourselves that we're sitting with here tonight. The trees we climbed, the rivers we fished in, the woods we hunted in, the bodies of water we swam in, and even the foods we ate were all defined in part by this unique geography of our place. I'm excited to spend this time exploring how our settings have shaped us and how we find community in our place. But first, I'd like to take a minute for all of us to return to our first settings. I want you to close your eyes. Picture a landscape from your childhood. Place yourself there for a few minutes with me. Can you visualize your surroundings, the details of the landscape around you? Are you in a forest or a field or in your backyard? Are you near water or mountains? Feel the air on your skin. Is it hot or cold, dry or humid? Inhale. What familiar smells come to mind? Pine, salt, the scent of marshes, dark, cool rivers, a campfire, or the musty smell of leaves in a forest floor. Now, recall the sounds that filled your space. Can you hear insects or birds? The sound of water, or maybe city roads nearby? Maybe the rocking of a train passing, or the sound of wind in tall grass. Think about how that particular place at that particular time shaped you, and maybe even now anchors you. We often look at where we are, where we're from, as a pin on a map. We list off our town, our state, maybe even our country. I am American. I was born in the state of Florida. I grew up in the Keys. Still, these are just flat representational images on a map. They will give you a small picture of where I am, but they will not show the layers. When I say I'm from the Keys, I have an image in my mind, an image that is multidimensional. My brain instantly conjures up smells, sights, memories, people, an entire community. No man is an island. Just as we're surrounded by people who are a part of our shaping, we're also surrounded by natural environments that are shaping us. This is our place. My story of place begins in the Florida Keys. The first air I breathed was salty sea air, thick and warm. The first earth my bare feet walked on was shell-covered limestone and fossilized coral. The first landscape I memorized was a landscape full of mangroves, big cloud-filled skies, and blue-green seas. The laugh of gulls and the hum of cicadas were constant background noise. The sweet smell of suntan lotion and the pungent smell of mangrove forest were always present. The taste of the Keys for me was salt and fish and fried plantains. But not everything in my landscape was blue and green. At night, as the sun set, the colors shifted to oranges and pinks and yellows, changing the landscape completely. Then we moved, and my landscape shifted. Instead of mangroves, there were pines, and instead of oceans, there were lakes. The air was filled with brand new smells. To this day, when I smell sun-warmed pine needles, I'm transported back to the very first time I inhaled that sweet scent in northern Michigan. With such incredible detail, I can remember the exact place I was standing and how the sun felt on my skin. Then there was the smell of snow for the first time. A clean, crisp whiff of pine terpenes absorbed into each snowflake and gently sifted through the air. Delicate, yet almost an assault on the noses of salty sea people. The taste of Michigan was the taste of wild, sweet strawberries picked by the coffee can and hard-earned blackberries, and the gamey flavor of venison freshly hunted by my stepdad. Oh, and puffballs. Battered and fried, these tasted just like the earth they came from. Walking through the forest and collecting these and then taking them home and eating them right away was exciting to me, fascinating, and is imprinted in my memories. And maybe why I love foraging so much to this very day. One thing that felt familiar to me was the sand in the water. I remember the feel of tumbling down Sleeping Bear sand dunes with sand in my hair and rising to the crest and seeing Lake Michigan laid out like an ocean in front of me. And then the setting shifted once again. The road led me to here. Carolina Piedmont defined my early years in South Carolina. The smell of sweet, fresh-cut hay, the pulse of crickets, and the insistence of Carolina wrens. Rumbling trains passed through my town daily, and catching lightning bugs was a nightly game. And let's not forget the smoky smell and taste of Carolina barbecue and fried okra sizzling in a cast iron pan. The paths I have taken in the upstate have led me into oak hickory forest filled with golden light and the songs of wood thrushes. To urban wetlands, swamps, once toxic waste dump sites, now being reclaimed by nature. Through misty mountain laurel trails deep into the wilderness. Into cold mountain streams filled with the music of many waters and the shade of rhododendrons. And as Michaud would say, into the high mountains of the Carolinas. In the last few years, my paths of water have carried me deep into the Jocassee Gorges. In each place, I have been intentional about really getting to know my neighbors, both wild and human. N. Scott Momaday said, "Once in his life, a man ought to concentrate his mind upon the remembered earth, I believe. He ought to give himself up to a particular landscape in his experience, to look at it from as many angles as he can, to wonder about it, to dwell upon it. He ought to imagine that he touches it with his hands at every season and listens to the sounds that are made upon it. He ought to imagine the creatures there and all the faintest motions of the wind. He ought to recollect the glare of noon and all the colors of dawn and dusk. In the late 1990s, I was introduced to Aldo Leopold's Sand County Almanac. It was my first exposure to what this idea of knowing my place looked like in real life. I had just moved to northern Greenville County from western North Carolina. I remember at that time committing to know my own backyard, my own forest as deeply as I could, to just sit and be in my place day after day. This time, learning my own backyard built a foundation for getting to know more communities near and far. And knowing our wild community has the power to transform us. And I found that for me, writing and taking photos were my ways to really pay attention to the community that surrounded me. I found in this way a vital connection that didn't come from a book or a class. It came from just being in my wild space. Just as we all need the community of people, we are also in urgent need of the community of the wild world around us. We all know that being in community offers lots of benefits. Community supports us on our journey. Community identifies us and reminds us that we don't stand alone. We are all part of something bigger. Here's a pin on the map, Lilium Grayeye. I'm sure just by looking at this photo, many of you know exactly where it is. And maybe for you, like me, this image of the Gray's lily conjures up so much more than just a single flower. I can hear the sound of the hermit thrush, see the orange flame azalea, feel the cool high air as it blows through those grasses. I've been to Roan Mountain in many seasons and experienced many moods. Community is interdependent. If one rejoices, we all rejoice. If one suffers, we all suffer. That's why we protect communities, both human and wild. I cannot see this longleaf pine forest without thinking of the morning I sat under one of those very trees as the sun rose in hopes of seeing a red-cockaded woodpecker. There are at least 3 specialized plants that depend on this longleaf ecosystem, as well as other birds, amphibians, and even insects. If one falls, they all fall. Community reminds us that we can be diverse and still thrive alongside each other. In fact, sometimes that diversity is what allows us to thrive. Many lichens are extremophiles, meaning they can thrive where other organisms fail. This is absolutely because of their ability to work in community. Fungi, algae, and cyanobacteria all have found ways to contribute to each other's existence and make life where it might not have been. Community teaches us that some things are sacred and need to be held very closely. We learn to respect and protect those who need it by being in community with them. Community expands our perspective. When I'm in our Carolina coastal communities, I'm constantly reminded that what we do here in the upstate affects them. It's not just about us. When I am in a totally different place, my community back home provides a compass point for understanding, for comparing and contrasting. Whether I'm zoomed in on these comparatively, or zoomed out, I should say, on these comparatively young mountains in Alaska, this is Wrangell St. Elias, or zoomed in on a familiar cousin. This flower genus was immediately recognizable to me all the way in Alaska because of my knowledge anchored here in our mountains. Parnassus palustris, alongside with some leaves of northern geranium in the background. Being in other communities also gives us a richer appreciation for our own communities. While I loved the aspen forest in Alaska, especially in the fall, I was blown away to realize how few species of trees there were in Alaska. According to the USDA, there are 32 species of native Alaskan trees, while here in our rich area, we have nearly 100 species of trees. Community connects us to one another in inseparable threads. This is a photo of a mycelial network I found under a log. Our forests are filled with these networks, connecting trees to one another and allowing for nutrient sharing. Being connected expands our resources. And in some cases, allows us to thrive. These lady slipper orchids depend on a fungal network to allow them to grow and bloom. Often it is the unseen support system of community that gives us our ability to thrive. Community shapes us. These fairy bells are found in a very specific plant community. Many of our favorite plants and animals live in very specialized communities that have made them unique. These Pamelia Lichens are shaped by getting close to one another. Normally, they have a radial growth pattern, always expanding out in circles, but when they bump into one another, they end up with flattened sides, something called a Voronoi pattern. Community inspires us not just to survive, but to thrive. It's a hard life for all of us in one way or another. When I understand the struggle for survival of plants living in temporary pools on a granitic outcrop in the hot Carolina sun, and then I see their beauty, I know a way can be found. I know that sometimes struggles are what makes us beautiful. There was a time when we depended on our landscape so immediately and intimately that it was woven into the very fabric of our lives. Our cultures were built out of the landscape, not in them. If we lived by the sea, fish were a member of our community. We took care of them so they would take care of us. We paid attention to the skies and the birds every day. We needed to get our very survival information through this intimacy with the land. We knew our place. Place, we were part of it. Place defined us and how we lived. This photo is actually not my photo, but this is a photo of the Bajao People, or sea gypsies or ocean people, who live entirely on the sea. And they are so intimate with their landscape that they can look at this seaweed floating underneath them and tell you what day of the month it is. Technology has broadened our world in many ways, but even so, we're becoming more and more distant from our land. Our information and our food comes from boxes. Our eyes, which once fixed on the landscape around us and gave us information for survival, are now fixed on screens. Our place is the landscape of technology. We are no longer compelled to know our physical place for survival or even community. Aldo Leopold said, "All ethics so far evolved rest upon a single premise, that the individual is a member of a community of interdependent parts. The land ethic simply enlarges the boundaries of the community to include soils, waters, plants, and animals, or collectively, the land." For the first time in human history, we have to be intentional about staying connected to our physical place. We are still part of a community of interdependent parts, And even though we might have our food delivered to us from Amazon, it still must grow on this earth. But more than food and information, our souls need this connection to our natural communities. We need to feel the ground under our feet, to hear the birds sing, to feel the air on our skin, to smell the aromas of our place. All of this will remind us that yes, our wild community is still intact. And while it is, so are we. So, how do we stay connected in today's world? Spend time outside. You don't have to go far. In fact, the better you know your own backyard community, the better you can know the rest of the world. This is my driveway, and I spend lots of mornings walking up and down, just getting to know my space in every season, in every hour, every shade of light. Get to know your neighbors. Get to know them more than just by name or flower. Watch them in every season. Have you ever paid attention to the way blue cohosh unfurls like a dragon? Have you gotten to know the place where it thrives, the community that surrounds it? And please, please, please introduce children in your life to our neighbors. If you don't, who will? Pay attention in every season. I'm sure you can identify a hickory tree, but have you ever noticed its early spring leaves? Have you ever noticed how a lichen looks before the rain, then after the rain? Slow down. A naturalist's pace is always a slow crawl. In fact, just sit a while, maybe a little more comfortably than that. And keep an open mind to a sense of wonder, no matter your age. I will leave you with the best reason to remember why we are all one wild community. My recent work has been working in wilderness therapy with kids who are in mental health crisis. And for them, and I've seen in my own life, sometimes the main reason to stay in touch with our wild communities is for the peace of wild things. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's life may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild, who do not live lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I above me the day stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. And that is all.
I am amazed. So I have recorded this. Now, I do not see any questions during the chat thing, but if you do have a question, you can just press your space bar. Go ahead and ask that to Tricia now.
That would be 40 Acre Rock. So this spring was the first time I finally had the chance to make it out there. Oh, the last quote was Wendell Berry. That was his poem, The Peace of Wild Things. Thank
Tricia,
you,
I
Sherry.
saw a blue cohosh in my backyard yesterday. I had no idea it was there before. First sighting of it.
Nice.
Your picture reminded me of that.
Thank you for your kind words.
Tricia and I are looking at the chat box. If y'all want to open that and type a comment or speak directly, that's fine.
Yay, Gail. That's exactly what I wanted to do.
Thank you, Tricia. I always, I miss seeing you, by the way. I
miss you too, Karen.
Yeah, and I love this slideshow. Your pictures are phenomenal. I agree with Dan. You are an artist, and I learned from you all. So please keep that going. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you, Carrie.
Absolutely extraordinary. Just beyond words, which is very unusual for me.
Thank you, Rick. You're one of my best cheerleaders.